Okay, we're gonna get started. Okay, so let's call to order the meeting of the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee of Thursday, December 13th. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, so first item is open time for public comment. And I'm going to ask you if you can please limit your comments to 3 minutes. And if you could please give your name and address before you start, that would be helpful. Thank you, Cindy.
Cindy Winter, Larkspur. I have a bit of good news. I don't know whether any of you have been following the MTC Horizon contest, where MTC search for major ideas to make traffic and other kinds of transportation flow more easily. And one of the finalists, which means he was one of the winners, is ARUP, and Will Baumgartner is the principal planner for building complementary protected bikeways within city centers to connect to bicycle superhighways, construct bike paths across the region's major freeways, including U.S. Route 101. So that gives me hope for the Tamalpais overcrossing, and also for what I still call Kirby's concept. I don't know the formal name, but it goes from Marinjo's across 101 to the Restoration Hardware headquarters. And it dawned on me a few days ago that I could get these ARUP submissions every single page with a public records request, so I have done that. And once I hear back from them, I will spread it around, including to this BPAC.
Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate it. Anybody else?
Janet Furman, Corte Madera. I wanted to say a few things about pavement. You know, when you ride a bike around town a lot, you tend to think about pavement. You notice every bump and crack and pothole, and sometimes what's just an annoyance for a car can be a serious safety hazard for a cyclist. Cracks just an inch wide are waiting to grab your tires and throw you over the handlebars. So what I wanted to say is, if we want to be a bike-friendly community, we need to have streets as smooth as they can be. Roads and bike paths need to be connected by smooth ramps. I've spoken about that before. And streets that have become dangerous need to be repaired as quickly as possible. And in riding around town, I realized some things about why streets become dangerous. In many cases, it's normal wear and tear, but in many of the streets in our town, it's poorly patched trenching. If you look at, for example, Lower Chapman, I mean the part that was not recently repaved, it's a patchwork of overlapping rectangles with sagging asphalt in the middle and widening cracks at the edges. And that's because the street was repeatedly dug up and repaired inadequately. I've recently learned by asking around that there are standards for restoring pavement that's been breached by utility trench work. Ideally, the full width of the pavement is replaced. But failing that, if just the trench itself is repaired, you don't just dump some cold asphalt into it and pat it down. That's a temporary patch. You need to widen it into a T shape and fill it with hot asphalt and then smooth it out with a steamroller. Obviously, this is more expensive, and it's no wonder that contractors try to get away with not doing it. And in the past, most of the time, they succeeded in not doing it. And I don't understand why this hasn't why proper repairs haven't been required all along by our public works departments of the present and the past. And I'm not trying to pin this on Corte Madera. It's every town in Marin, it's every town everywhere has improperly patched trenching. When private companies are allowed to dig up our streets and make substandard repairs, the taxpayers wind up paying later on. And in between, motorists and especially cyclists suffer. Does that mean I'm out of time?
Yeah, it's 3 minutes. Sorry, so if you could wrap up.
Okay. Well, I think that this is scandalous, and I appreciate that we're taking a harder line. I mean, our Public Works Department is taking a harder line. I appreciate that the temporary patches in the middle of Chapman that I've been complaining about finally yesterday got repaired. And I just want to say that I hope that in the future that we can require everyone, that means PG&E and people who are building homes, to patch the road properly and not 6 months after they dig it up. I mean, in a reasonable time frame. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for the record, too, we're not allowed to discuss items that are brought up at open time or address them because they're not on the agenda. Anybody else want to speak? No? Okay, then we will move into our presentation, which is from David Parisi.
If I could just say a few remarks to kick this off. So yeah, we have Mr. Parisi here to do a presentation on the Central Marin Regional Pathways Gap Closure Project. It's a nice long title, but it seems to fit what's actually going on. We're kicking off the project approval and environmental document phase. We received active transportation funds recently for this phase, as well as for final design. And we are still trying to obtain construction funding for construction. So we've worked with David. We've submitted an application for those funds, and we're still waiting to hear. Great. And so please, David, thank you.
Great, thank you. Good evening. As already said, I'm David Parisi with Parisi Transportation Consulting. Congratulations again for receipt of the ATP grant for this planning and design aspect. As RJ mentioned, hopefully we'll hear soon if there's been funding awarded for construction, but we still have a lot to do before that time. And actually, can I move the slides forward? Do it. Okay, great. I'm going to try to go through some set of slides pretty quickly. The real intent tonight is to get feedback from the group and the public to really hear about some of your thoughts about this pathway and in the process moving forward for the planning of this project and design. A little bit of background. Right in the middle there, those green lines show what the Central Marin Regional Gap Closure Project is all about. It's the convergence of a lot of pathways that exist today and some others that are planned or could be planned in the future. It's completing the connection along Nellen Avenue and improving things along the south side of Warnham Drive. Also includes crossing the Pfeiffer ramps. And I'll show you some more details of those momentarily, but this is kind of a 5,000-foot view, and we'll dive in to some of the other aspects of the project in a bit. Here, this is my mouse. All right.
We gotta get this straightened out. We go through this every meeting. It's like
this is great. As RJ mentioned, we are under the PAED, which is Project Approval and Environmental Documentation stage. And under that, we have several subtasks that we're going to be completing. We have a field review, including topographical surveying and mapping, really understanding the area needs to be done. Data collection, including counts and other elements. We'll be mapping the area. We'll be conducting a robust traffic analysis because we are going to be looking at potentially opening up Nellen to access off of Pfeiffer. We'll be looking at different alternatives, and we're going to chat about that tonight because there's different ways to provide a bikeway or a pathway along Nellen Avenue. Of course, there'll be some really robust outreach, not just with this group, but also stakeholders that live and reside and have business along the corridor. We'll be refining the design to get to an improved concept. In concert with all that work, we do need to complete some environmental work to be in compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act. Big issues, we believe, or the biggest issues we believe will be looking at transportation impacts, particularly if part of Nellen is open to inbound access off of Pfeiffer. There are some trees along Nellen that we could impact, that we'll take a look at, and there's some cultural resources as well. We've identified just some of the groups that we think are going to be interested in this project that we'll be reaching out to. Early next year, there'll be an open house where we'll invite all of these groups, including you, members of Corte Madera. Part of the project actually is in Larkspur. Actually, the Warnham and Nellen intersection area is within the jurisdiction of the city of Larkspur. But here's some of the stakeholders. Be interested here if there's some others that you can think of or you may want to convey to us tonight or at a later date. Here's a closer view of the map that was included in the grant application. The project does have a long name. I think that the long name was impressive to the grant reviewers because it included the Central Marin regional gap closure project. And if you look closely here, what you can see is that we're looking at, I think the centerpiece of the project is providing a pathway along Nellen Avenue, particularly along the west side of Nellen Avenue between Pfeiffer and Warnham. We don't know what that path is going to look like yet. And we're going to show you some potential options tonight that'll have to be further developed as part of the process. From that point to the pedestrian overcrossing of 101 along Nellen Avenue, we got to cross Pfeiffer Avenue, which are hook ramps, which have lots of traffic. There's different ways we can do that. We want to hear some input tonight. We're going to show you some initial concepts. And along Nellen Avenue to the north of Pfeiffer, we're looking at a Class 3 facility. That's a low-volume roadway, and there's not a whole lot of room to do anything else. The intersection of Warnham Drive and Nellen, as I mentioned before, is within City of Larkspur right-of-way or jurisdiction. We're going to be looking at some options there because, of course, we need to cross at that location, and it is uncontrolled at this point. We also know that the pathway on the south side of Warnham Drive between Tamil Vista and Redwood Highway exists, is heavily used. We're going to look for opportunities to improve that, make it wider, or provide a better barrier or a buffer between that and the roadway, or other aspects as well. And then finally, you'll see annotation there says potential one-way access right at Pfeiffer Avenue. We're going to be looking at what the effects would be of potentially opening Nellen to allow southbound access from Pfeiffer as a means to potentially reduce some of the conflicts and congestion along Tamil Vista Boulevard. So we are taking traffic counts and we'll be modeling the effects of that. That's something that the stakeholders and the reviewers of the grant thought was a potential positive of the project, and we're going to be looking at that because it could provide some congestion relief and some conflict reduction for users along Tamil Vista as well as Warnham. And I'll get into each of those details a little bit further as I take my, Well,
everyone's welcome to pizza. There's enough here for everybody, so don't be shy.
Thank you, Kirby.
The smell will get to you, man. You got it. Like otherwise, you're just gonna drool.
While you're doing that, I'll continue on. We believe there's at least 5 key focus areas that the project will need to address, and let me get into each of those. The first, of course, is Nellen Avenue itself. This is Nellen near the hump of the roadway, looking to the south. The right-of-way is really skinny here. It's only about 45 feet wide, so we only have 45 feet to deal with here, and that's from where that fence is. And from that fence to the east is Caltrans right-of-way. and there's a few feet between the fence and the curb. And then the street itself has 8-foot parking areas on both sides and 10-foot travel lanes. So the street is thin, but it is a two-way street. And then there's also a narrow sidewalk on the west side. So something has to give if we're going to put a pathway in here or a bikeway. And we'll show you some of the options that we're thinking about. To the left here, that's called a cross-section, and that's exactly how it looks today. You can see the 45-foot right-of-way, the roadway, the Caltrans right-of-way to the east to the left, and then the right-of-way line to the west, and the 4.5-foot sidewalk. As part of the grant application, there was this option A was submitted. It's not in stone, but this is what was part of the grant application. So we're showing that as option A tonight. That included removing parking along the east side of the roadway. So there's some marked parking with parking tees in some other areas where it's not marked. And then shifting the traffic lanes a little bit, still having two-way traffic, keeping parking on the west side, and then installing what's called a cycle track or a Class 4 facility, which would be separate from the sidewalk.
I'm sorry, parking on the west side or east side?
Parking, you see parking would be on the west side. Move my mouse. Right here.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Providing a buffer, or a separation for the cycle track, additional protection. So that was what was included in the grant application. We've sketched up a couple additional options that probably should be considered, and folks will probably be very interested in, the pros and cons of those as well. So the left side is exactly what I just showed you, existing conditions on top, and on the bottom was that option A, which is the cycle track. We sketched up a potential option B, which instead of a cycle track would be a Class 1 pathway, which would be a multi-use pathway for pedestrians and cyclists. Keep in mind that Warnham is a multi-use pathway. And the crossing over the Corte Madera Creek is a skinny multi-use pathway. So this is what we're showing here. This option, interestingly enough, the one that we're showing as option B, could retain the curb against the Caltrans side, so that wouldn't need to be moved under this schematic. You can see there's a tree still there. And then provide two 10-foot traffic lanes, 8-foot parking lane, and then a Class 1 pathway. And then we're also showing an option C, which also would have a two-way traffic parking just on the west side, but would move the curb on the Caltrans side or the east side to provide a little bit more, a more gracious pathway with better buffer and so on and so forth, and not have to rely on the west side properties to use for a shoulder. These are just some of the ideas. Parking could flip-flop to the other side. We may hear that folks want to perhaps look at a one-way for traffic, just in one direction only, especially if access is opened at Pfeiffer, perhaps just a southbound Nellen Avenue. So all this will be considered. We'd love to hear some input tonight. These are just some starting points. I mentioned the idea of providing vehicular access to Nellen. I wasn't here in 1987. I think, who was? Who remembers this? Yeah, okay. So, before Warnham, that alignment used to be the train, and you can see how the roads were configured with Nellen and sweeping underneath the north side undercrossing there under 101, a few decades ago. And Nellen used to be a two-way access street. That's how you got to the other side of the highway. So what we're looking at under this study would be potentially opening up Nellen just to traffic going eastbound on Pfeiffer and then turning right onto Nellen. Okay, does that make sense? But not traffic coming the other direction getting onto Nellen, because the median would still stay there. And some of the things we're going to be looking at there is, well, gee, okay, if you do that, could that help? Could that help Tamil Vista? Because we know that traffic turns, the left turns from Tamil Vista onto Warnham are huge at times, causing lots of delay. And we're going to model with traffic volumes and traffic modeling and simulations to figure out how much time would that save, how much congestion would that reduce, and what could be some of the other effects as shown here. So we've already started to develop some of the tools to really understand the potential benefits, as well as maybe some drawbacks associated with that, because that would mean, of course, more traffic on Nellen. At the same time, we're trying to get a pathway or a bikeway along Nellen. I got to get my keyboard out there further. Also, this is looking at the on and off ramps at Pfeiffer. You can see the cars coming at us are coming off at the off ramp, coming from the off ramp. This is currently an uncontrolled crosswalk across both lanes. There's also another crosswalk to get to the bus stop. It's a heavily used bus stop. The pathway or bikeway will need to cross this point. Most likely, if we're successful, we're going to bring more users across here, and we want to make it a safer crossing. So we're going to be looking at things such as the potential use of some devices like rectangular rapid flashing beacons or a staggered crosswalk where you offset it. But we got to be very cognizant of what this could mean for traffic, particularly traffic getting off of 101 and queuing back. We don't want to cause any additional impacts. So that's going to be part of this project as well. Now going a bit to the south, this is a photo looking at Warnham and Nellen intersection, T intersection with a couple crosswalks, uncontrolled along Warnham Drive, as you know. But once we have a pathway or a bikeway along Nellen, we got to cross the street at this point. So we're going to look at different methods for doing that, including different types of traffic controls. As part of the grant application, a traffic signal was mentioned, but we also want to look potentially at a roundabout. We know that a roundabout can fit in this location. We've started to test it, and it could have some benefits. So we've actually started doing some layout work, understanding the right-of-way, some of the obstacles. You can see we started even sketching out some ideas. Of course, we need to if we design something like this, we need to make sure it works for fire apparatus and won't cause more congestion. So there's some really neat opportunities, and we'll be looking at different types of traffic controls and different ideas for crossing the street at this location. As I mentioned, we do need to do environmental assessment, working with your planning department. I do believe that the biggest issues that we're going to need to address will be the traffic, particularly if Nellen is open at Pfeiffer. What's this mean for safety and for traffic volumes and traffic along Nellen itself? If we move the curb along Nellen by Caltrans here shown here, and we move it further to the east a few feet, there's a different variety of trees and different stages of health that we would affect, and those will need to be studied as well as part of the project. After we get through the PAED, again, the project approval and environmental documentation, and it has that name on purpose because it's a Caltrans process. Actually, we need to follow. This is state funding. Once we get through that point, then we get into what's going to hopefully be a lot easier because we'll have done all the outreach, we'll have a preferred design, then we'll start getting into some of the final technical studies. Engineers will start doing a lot of the work with CAD to actually develop plans, specifications, real tight cost estimates. We'll know a lot more about utilities. We'll work with the state and the town on getting encroachment permits and right-of-way certifications, and finally develop some final plans. This is a very detailed schedule. Generally, what we're showing is that our goal is by the end of next summer to have those final plans in place. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, and we're looking forward to it. And with that, I'll stop here, and happy to try to answer any questions you may have. Love to hear any feedback you also have about some ideas and things we should be taking into account.
David, thank you very much. So just
Thanks.
Quick review on process. What we'll do first is we will take questions from the BPAC members, not comments or input. So just questions for clarification, then we're going to open it up to the public, and we'll hear the public's input. And then after we've heard the public input, we can provide our input and our feedback. Does that work for everybody? Great, okay. Any questions from BPAC members about the presentation? Lee, no? Down here? Or?
I have a question, but I'll wait. I want to formulate it. So I'm thinking through something.
Okay. Anybody else? No?
Just one.
Yeah.
Were there any bike counts or vehicle counts yet as part of this, or is that a process that's to come?
We actually have kicked that off and done some vehicle, bike, pedestrian, and car counts during weekday peak periods, because we're going to use that for modeling purposes, at 4 or 5 intersections, so we can understand the ramifications of potentially opening up Nellen at Pfeiffer.
My question's similar to that, which is, who are we building this for? Who are we designing it for? What's the most common flow? Is it people coming through Corte Madera? Is it commuters? Or is it just people who live now at the new development there? That would be helpful to talk through in terms of giving feedback on the options you're considering for the design.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that as well. Actually, I mean, there's going to be a variety of users, of course. They're coming from all directions. There's several numbered bike routes in this area that all converge in this area. We know that Tamil Vista is a narrow roadway that currently doesn't have bike lanes. They're proposed, part of the Complete Street project, which is going to be wonderful. But, you know, we have users coming from the boardwalk, they're coming from the crossing over the new crossing over Sir Francis Drake that want to get to the south side, southwest side, or to the Sandra Marker Trail. Also folks from the Corte Madera Creek overcrossing. We have lots of users on the pedestrian overcrossing as well. So I think there's going to be a variety. There's going to be commuters, there's going to be students, there's going to be recreational riders. And I think there's the opportunity here to develop a project that can cater to a bunch of different user types, but also ages and abilities.
And eventually, hopefully, we're going to complete that piece of the North-South Greenway, which is also being worked on, which is going to funnel more bikers from the north into this area over onto the Sandra Marker Trail, correct? I think.
Yeah, we're showing that on the bottom where it says future North-South Greenway.
Great. I had a couple of questions. This is wild because I remember filling this application out and doing this a couple years ago.
You were there when we did the first version.
Yes. So this is with the city of Larkspur. They were awarded the grant as well. They have to sign off on this and approve this as well as us.
They are a partner, I believe. They signed the grant application.
And I'm trying to remember, are we talking about potentially redoing part of the bike path along Wareham also, or did we decide not to make that part of this project?
The very first, so this grant application is one of the very few statewide that got accepted that is not in a disadvantaged community. So it went through a couple cycles before we were successful. We're very fortunate to be successful. But the very first grant application included improvements, or actually a pathway along the north side of Wareham,
Right.
in addition to improvements on the south side.
Yes.
Through some kind of value engineering and working with the community before that last application was submitted, it was decided to not include improvements on the north side, but really focus on the south side of Wareham and see what we can do within the existing right-of-way to improve that pathway, as well as its connections across Tamil Vista and Redwood Highway.
So moving it to the north side is not part of this process anymore?
Correct.
Because I know when we were filling out the application, we were talking about maybe we could just do it after we got the grant. But
Yeah, I think when we were filling out the initial application, the Tam Ridge apartments had not been
No,
built.
they had not been.
And it appeared that there was some room to do something on the north side.
Right. Okay. Any other questions or?
Yep.
Yes, go ahead.
And sorry for coming late. This includes widening the separated multi-use path here?
As practical, we're going to take a look and see what can be done on Wareham. That's probably a secondary concern of this project, but we're going to see what can we do between Tamla Vista and Redwood Highway along the south side of Warrenham to provide more separation or better pavement, or both.
The major, I think your 5 focus areas really highlight the problem areas, but I see the Nellen Pfeiffer, the crossing over Pfeiffer as the primary one. And I'm just wondering, in developing this, was there any consideration or trade-offs here to say, well, we can address all 5 or we can address 1? I mean, it would,
Yeah,
is that been considered, or is that in play at any, now?
well, we think we need to address all 5. So, it's particularly at Pfeiffer, we've already started thinking of some ideas, including widening, thanks for the pointer there, widening that median that you can see right between the street, potentially removing the crosswalk that goes directly to the bus stop, but instead focusing bus stop riders on a new, kind of a realigned crosswalk at Pfeiffer and having them walk between new barriers that would better protect them to the bus stop. And then also the crosswalk itself, widening the median there to at least 6 feet because it's super narrow. We're also
A
looking...
real refuge.
Yes, and then also potentially staggering that crosswalk. So you go to the median and then you have to turn to the right and then you cross again so you can face traffic and you only have to cross one stream of traffic at a time. And we're also going to be looking at different types of traffic controls. Again, this is great for focusing in. Big concern is going to be that off-ramp, right? Cars are coming around that corner, and how can we provide as much visibility and safety for trail users as possible while not impacting, the off-ramp movement and backing up traffic on the highway and causing, vehicular issues. So that is very important, very important. But all 5 locations we're going to be spending, we need to solve.
Any other questions? Okay, then we're going to open it up for public comment. David, thank you. So if you could please, again, give your name, and if you can please limit yourself to 3 minutes, that would be terrific. Thank you so much.
Cindy Winter, I cannot limit my comments to 3 minutes, but if you can tell me where to write, I will put them on a piece of paper and send them to you.
Yeah, you can.
RJ?
Yeah, you can send them to me. My email's on the town webpage.
All right, thank you. My first question is of a somewhat philosophical nature. There are a lot of parked cars along Nellen. Some of them are stored vehicles. Many others, I believe, are people who drive them to Nellen and then get out and take the bus. TAM wants to increase bus ridership in order to reduce traffic congestion and reduce greenhouse gases too. Because we all know what 101 is, it's very congested. On the other hand, TAM supports cyclists on suburban streets because they reduce traffic congestion there and reduce greenhouse gases. So, on Nellen, how should the needs of bus riders and cyclists be balanced? Can they be balanced, and must there be a choice? But I have sort of a feeling that this issue might come up down the road, so I think everybody has to think about them. And as for the Pfeiffer crossing, which Cheryl mentioned, Tom Jakovics, who is constructing the new office building on Pfeiffer, offers free box seats for observing behavior at his current office across the street in the triangular building. He will be happy to host a DPW delegation there. And the time to observe traffic on Pfeiffer is at 8 in the morning. A cyclist or pedestrian cannot cross at Nellen and Pfeiffer because the cars are snaking. They're about 3 inches apart. And it's just a situation that should not be. And how it can be solved, I don't know. And then as far as the roundabout is concerned, I thought there wasn't space, but if there is space, that's just fine. However, I assume that space does not include a separate bike lane. And can cyclists control the traffic flow to avoid conflicts with circulating motorists? The problem here is these motorists may be very nice people when you meet them in person, but when they're in a car. And it comes from a neurological trait called habit memory, which is repetitive learning. It's similar to working on your golf swing or breaststroke to get it just right. And so I will send you a scientific explanation of this very brief, and then you can read it all. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Anybody else?
Steve Lamb. I live in San Anselmo. I have a few questions, and one is related to Cindy. Maybe answered part of my question is who parks on Nellen. So I'm curious about that. Then another question is related to the Warrenham-Nellen interchange and possibility of signals or roundabout, and how is that decision made? You know, what goes into deciding to put a signal at an intersection? You know, I assume there's particular criteria that needs to be met. Another question is on where the Sandra Marker Trail ends at Tamil Vista. The light pole, the signal pole is in the pathway, and that I noticed sometimes that makes it a little bit awkward, and so I wonder if that is something that might be addressed during this project. And then the other question is, it was mentioned also earlier, there's a project for Tamil Vista and how that project will be coordinated with this particular work. I'm curious how that would happen, the scheduling or coordination of that. So thanks.
Thank you. Why don't we just go through everything, and then David, you can come back up and answer all the questions. Would that make sense? That's probably. And then on the Tamil Vista, just I can answer that. We're actually be talking about Tamil Vista later in this meeting, I believe. Yes? I read the agenda ahead of time. That's good.
Patty Stolier, Casa Buena Drive, also on the agenda. One thing that came to mind was way back in the day of Marin Deserves Better, there was a proposal to have a loop and have the southbound go only on either Nellen or Tamil Vista, and the northbound vice versa. Is that dead in the water, or is that something that we're still talking about? And yes, I was concerned when you said you're doing peak times, when you consider peak times, because with a school right there, it's different than normal business transportation needs. And then I also have a question about who parks on Nellen, because I think it's a lot of the things that were said about people leaving their car there, and I think we should install a Ring doorbell and watch and see where everybody's going.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, no, then we will close public comment, and David, do you want to come up and address some of the questions that were
Yeah,
raised?
I'll quickly do that about who parks on Nellen. We're going to be doing parking surveys. We're going to look at the capacity. We're also going to see who's parking there. I do know that a couple years ago, there weren't any parking regulations, and we saw lots of buses and RVs, and you're not seeing that now. And some of the, we're not seeing as much parking out there either. But nonetheless, we will be doing parking surveys as part of the study along all of Nellen. Some comments about Pfeiffer, of course, I mentioned that earlier. We're going to be looking closely at different solutions. That is a key issue. We'll be observing traffic at all times of day, in the morning, after school, and in the evening. Is there a space for roundabout? The town had a study done by another firm that determined that a roundabout could work here at a very high service level. And that there is room. We've determined that there's actually even more room than we thought, but we'll be laying it out and seeing how it can work. We'll compare its performance to other types of traffic controls. And when I mean performance, I mean safety aspects, delays, queuing, ability for bikes and pedestrians, cyclists and pedestrians to get across safely. Who will make that decision? Well, I think that'll be based on some of the evidence that we come back with. And ultimately, Peter, that decision would be made. Council. Okay. Signal pole at Tamil Vista. I think we're either looking at part of the complete street study. We'll take a look at that as well. Any obstructions. And Patty asked about the Greenbrae study, some of the ideas that were pursued there for southbound ramps and whatnot. I don't think anything we're going to be doing will preclude some future improvements out here, but we're looking at this pretty fresh, again, to improve bicycle and pedestrian access and safety. And what are the peak times? As I mentioned before, we're going to be looking at not just the AM and PM peak, but the after school, because we know that's huge with Redwood High School and Hall traffic, and so on and so forth, as well as considering weekend flows, not just for vehicles, but for people on foot and riding their bicycles. So I think that those were the questions, the gist of the questions. So if you have any others, let me know.
And then Chair Vazzi, if I could just add on a couple things to what Mr. Parisi just said. So definitely, I think the point about coordinating with the Tamil Vista project will be important. We don't really see construction happening at the same time. Our best guess now is that Tamil Vista will come first, seeing as how we've just applied for construction funds for this. So they shouldn't be in conflict. I liked the question about what goes into deciding whether you put in a roundabout or a traffic signal. For the most part, all of the evidence from the U.S. and around the world shows that roundabouts carry more traffic with less delay and have a better safety record. So most traffic engineers consider them to be superior traffic control devices. The main constraint really comes to right-of-way. So this would be a substandard, a mini roundabout with a fully rollable curbs and islands so that the fire access is really preserved. And that leads to the other question about bike and ped usage. So the thing about roundabouts is if you kind of can break your cyclists into two separate users, like confident users typically act like cars. They'll enter the roundabout and exit the roundabout just like a vehicle would at about the same speed that a vehicle would use a roundabout. And then less confident users who don't want to be in the right of way act like pedestrians. And so the schematic that Mr. Parisi showed did show pedestrian crossings. And so if you don't want to get in the roundabout on your bike, you're certainly welcome to use the ped crossings. And so we feel that all users can be adequately serviced in the roundabout scenario. Everything else, I think Mr. Parisi covered well.
Thank you. And I recently discovered you bring some prior roundabout experience with you from some of your prior roles, which is helpful. Thank you. So, Santa Barbara.
Oh. Bend, Oregon is amazing. I mean, Truckee too. And Yosemite Valley.
Okay, so I think David's answered all the questions.
David, when's the next time that you will make this presentation and seek, will you make a similar presentation to Larkspur?
I don't know.
I can answer that. So we're actually trying to target a January designated meeting for this project. So it'll be an open house forum or community workshop to discuss it in detail.
But not a Larkspur specific. It'd be for the
Yeah, and then we may at some point go to Larkspur as well.
Okay.
But that's the next event we're planning for.
Thank you. Okay, then I guess now it's time for feedback from Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee members. Is there anybody who has feedback, comments, ideas, suggestions, who wants to speak? Cheryl, I see you leaning forward.
I do.
Can you get up closer to the microphone?
Okay.
'Cause
I
we're on television.
I don't want to be a naysayer on this, but because I'm very fond generally of trying to steer cyclists away from motor vehicles, and this would be a way to do that, at least along Nellen. But Nellen isn't the problem here. You know, the problem is crossing Pfeiffer, and you know, we've all heard of the bridge to nowhere. This feels like a path to a death trap in a sense, and that's really my concern. And you know, if we have this pile of money, could we create an overcrossing there instead of having a path on a street that's relatively calm at this point and is not a threat to pedestrians or cyclists? So that's just my first reaction, and I'm, you know, eventually when the town has a network built out, this, I think Nellen should be addressed, but right now I think the crossing at Pfeiffer Avenue is the major safety problem.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Could we see the list of people that have been, can or will be contacted so I can sort of supplement it?
There it is.
Yeah. So, and I don't know who's, I guess this will be part of the minutes, but it occurs to me that obviously bus commuters that use that Pfeiffer intersection should get notice of any future meeting. It seems to me we've got a huge group of bicycle commuters that use the ferry that should get notice in any way that we can so that they can understand what the future developments there. As well, pedestrians that are using the ferry, safe routes to schools, Redwood High School, Hall Middle School, obviously the Tamridge management should be involved, and of course, Mr. Jakovitz, the developer of the buildings in that area, and Larkspur walkers, people, pedestrians. Yeah, I was thinking all the pedestrians that.
They're a group.
Oh, they're an actual group.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Larkspur Walkers.
Larkspur Walkers is an organization of walkers, pedestrians. And that's the ones that occurred to me that are high use users that would have good input.
Any more feedback from anybody? Anybody down here? No one else down here? So, Cheryl, I understand and appreciate your comment, you know, but part of this is also the way grants come in, you know, and grants come in for specific pieces, and this is a grant for this specific piece. And we tried to, as I recall at the time, we were trying to do it in the, you know, architecture of the entire hope for what we're going to be doing. I think the plan. Sorry, go ahead.
Then I would hope that the town would make it a priority to address fight for crossing in maybe a more elaborate fashion in the future. At least acknowledge there may still be a need.
Right.
We can improve it, but there may still
Right.
be need.
But I'm glad that we are talking about substantial improvement as part of this project, right? Am I interpreting? Yes.
Absolutely. We're going to do all we can within the space we have. We think there's some really good opportunities for providing a much safer crossing than there is today. Is it possible to zoom in a little bit on that one as well? The median right there at the bottom is super skinny. There's very little room for anybody to feel safe when they're crossing the street. But there's also shoulders on both sides of Pfeiffer now, little shoulders about 4 feet wide, which means we possibly can, we're going to look at moving the lanes over a little bit and widening that median out. to provide an area that's much more comfortable, perhaps even a median that's wide enough that we can cross people from the north side to the median, and then along the median, they would travel westerly and then cross again, providing eye-to-eye contact with motorists, and one crossing at a time, which may also provide some benefits with some of the traffic control that we're thinking about, beacons and whatnot, and trying to get the crosswalk a little further away from the ramps. So there's many things we're going to be looking at. I think there's a great opportunity, since this Djokovic site is being developed now, that we possibly could move a ramp where that ramp is further to the west, where used to be a driveway. It's not going to be there anymore, so it gives us the opportunity to relocate the ramp. But we'll be coming back with some very detailed ideas for this location. I mean, this is crazy because 50 feet away you have another crosswalk, to the bus stop. So motorists, there's just a lot going on. We want to make it simpler for all users. So I'm glad you brought that up. It's a high priority.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just wanted to address, I haven't ridden my bike in a while, but I used to ride through that undercrossing on at least once a week, I think. And
Warnham?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I just wanted to make sure that, we really are taking a hard look at the bike path. I actually didn't ride the bike path because it was in too bad a shape then. I can't imagine it's in any better shape now. But I think especially for kids coming back and forth from school, that is a tremendously important bike path that we should really, really take a look at making sure. And part of the problem is, I don't think you can widen it because there's so much rock underneath that overcrossing. I know we looked at that once.
Mm-hmm.
But anything we can do to make that safer, easier, smoother, because I think that's a fairly potentially popular route with kids coming from the east side.
In this picture here, if it's also possible to zoom in a little bit on the other side of the street, you can see from that crosswalk to the west, the pathway starts to become separated, but not by the 5 feet, which is kind of the standard separation that we're looking for nowadays. But to the west, it's right against the curb.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much right against the curb all the way through the intercrossing to the other side. So we're going to look at some opportunities to provide better separation and for sure to repave that pathway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
As I recall, at the underpass there, it's solid cement. I think they did some seismic retrofitting there, and I know it affects the sightlines when, I forget what direction, but when pedestrians are crossing there, as it is now, you often don't see, I think it's when you're on the south side going to the north side, crossing Warnham, you can't see some of the traffic coming from westbound. And so I don't know if that would have an impact on the roundabout, but it should be something you'd want to look at.
Thank you for bringing that up. We'll look at all the sight lines from all the different perspectives.
And David, I think that you addressed this once, but I hope you can remind me. As you go underneath the overpass, you have a support for the freeway, and then you have a lot of dirt and where it comes down. And I've always wondered whether it was possible to excavate on the right side, which would be the southbound side of the support, so that the multi-use path would go there instead of being next to the lane of traffic.
I've always wondered that too. So there's, this is an old railroad overcrossing, right? And there's a solid wall on the south side, and that's used for shear purposes. If we went behind it, it may be possible, but there's a lot of rock. It's higher. It would take a lot of excavation. We'd have to understand the pilings, what are called the pilings on the other side, how much we can pull out. But there'd also be, users would be, nobody could, they'd be separated from drivers by a solid wall.
Yeah.
Which could be an issue,
Yeah.
for keeping an eye on the road and users. So, and it'd be expensive. It's not part of this project,
Okay.
but it's something that we could see if it can't be precluded.
And Chair Vazio, if I may, to your point about the Warnham path, I do believe, since we're all reminded that we're in the environmental and design phase, in working as Public Works works with Mr. Parisi on finalizing the design, this is a piece of the project that we could separate out and attempt to do, even if we weren't awarded the construction funds. The rehabbing and the maximizing the use and safety of the Warnham path is something that I see as within our realm, something we could do on the town dime, so to speak, if we weren't successful in getting the whole project funded for construction with an ATP program. We'll probably still continue to go after ATP funds for the whole project, but right now, actually Jared and some of David's staff are working on the Redwood Highway path, and that's a rehab project on that pathway. So I see this as a candidate for some level of rehab in the near term if the grant isn't awarded for construction.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments?
I would just echo what most everyone else said, and I don't think this is working. That Warnham undercrossing is a key path for students to take, and some of the tree roots, I know there was some work to make sure the tree roots made it less bumpy, because the tree roots were tearing it up or making it very bumpy, and there's a downhill slope as you go down by the DMV toward Tamil Vista, and I've seen little kids on bikes getting up some speed and starting to hit the bumps just as they're getting towards the end of the path, which is not the safest outcome.
Okay.
But anyway, it's a
Didn't you used to lead your kids on that bike path?
That was the bike to school day path.
That was
So,
the path.
like 120 kids going through that pathway.
You know it.
Yeah, those crosswalks then getting on either side are kind of scary
Yeah.
crossings, but.
I would add just that it's really encouraging to hear that the town would be interested in taking on improving that pathway, or at least making that a priority. I feel like the design elements of this project, you know, addressing the crossing right on Pfeiffer. I mean, obviously that's a really high risk area. This path gets used a bunch. That seems like really ripe for improvements. Spending a lot of money creating this fancy cycle track between Warnham and Pfeiffer, I'm not convinced it would get really used much. I don't know why cyclists would want to cross Pfeiffer. I mean, that's just not a great. I don't see it as a good investment when you have these other pieces in this area that could really benefit from improvements. So obviously we're in the design phase, so you want to make sure you have all the designs, but I think just in terms of priorities, making sure we're keeping a focus on where the work's really needed.
Okay.
Anybody else? No? Okay. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for the presentation, David. Really
Thank you,
appreciate
David.
it. Okay, moving on to our next item, committee member reports. Is there any committee member have a report they would like to give? Yeah, Cheryl.
I have something. I think Mr. Parisi was involved with this. The county has a 2018 Marin County Travel Safety Plan, and Chapter 4 is Town of Corte Madera. It's available online. And statistics about collisions, mapping of something I think, I haven't looked at it because I just found it this afternoon, but it's worth looking at it. Right on the first page, the intersection, Patty will like this, the intersection of Tamalpais and Sanford Street. It's one of Corte Madera's priority project locations. The intersection had 8 reported collisions in a recent 5-year period. That's more than 10% of the collisions totally for the town was right there at Sanford. So, no surprise to Patty and Peggy. Anyway, I think there's a bunch of data in here, and it's worth looking at.
Thank you. Yes, Kirby.
I haven't seen it, but somebody told me that in the Corte Madera Town Center, there's a map or kiosk of bike paths. Anyway, I thought I was going to try to go out of my way to go see that before this meeting, but I haven't. But I was wondering if anyone else has and knows anything about it.
Haven't seen it.
There.
I think this you and I were responsible.
We might have approved it.
Yeah. It's a takeoff from the Marin County Bicycle Coalition, and the town center presented it to you and I at a meeting, and then they put it into three different locations at the town center. I'm always eyeballing pedestrians and cyclists to see how much it gets used, but it was very considerate of the town center.
Okay. I guess I'll go check it out.
Any other committee member reports?
I have a quick update. I mentioned this before the meeting, but I am going to be moving out of the Bay Area, and therefore will be resigning from the BPAC, unfortunately. So hopefully that means it opens up a spot for someone else new to take on. But it's been a wonderful opportunity, a real honor to serve on BPAC. It's been great working with you all, and really inspired by all the public engagement. I think it's great. I really feel like many of you in the audience are honorary BPAC members. You just get to sit over there, but it's been a great working partnership, and thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Lee.
Yeah.
We'll miss you.
Yeah. Miss you.
Definitely.
Did you do something, David?
I did. I just wanted to bring up, on two separate occasions, I have actually almost hit pedestrians who were
On your
at
bike or
night.
in-
No, I'm sorry, I was in a motor vehicle, that were going from the new parking lot across from Nordstrom without using the crosswalk and shooting across that median. And I think there's a fence that's going to be some sort of barrier that's part of the design, as I recall. But if there can be temporary fencing placed there to prevent pedestrians from running across there and making them go to the intersection, that would be safer.
We closed the median. There was a turn lane into that eastern entrance into the north parking lot there, and we closed that movement off by putting a curb and median strip in the middle of Redwood Highway right there. So that was our attempt in design to deteriorate or keep people from crossing the road. At the
Has that been
uncontrolled
completed?
location. Yeah, we have.
Very recently? All right, I'll go back
in the
and
last
take a look.
month or so.
Great, thank you. And then the only other thing I wanted to say is I took my daughter up to Yosemite recently, and they have finally completed roadway construction that includes, I think, 4 separate roundabouts. So it's just another place to see roundabouts in action with very heavy traffic.
Good. Okay, thank you. We will then move on to some project updates from Public Works. Peter, first, Casa Buena Complete Streets.
Okay, thank you, Chair Vazio. We're actually might tag team, and I just wanted to give a little intro on the, I think maybe the next slide, and Jared, for Casa Buena Complete Streets. That's the first of the project updates that we're going to talk about. So we finished the design. I think RJ just left, but he's the project manager for this, and he's been working with Rich Souza with the Parisi's team on really the details of how the roadway needs to get widened. I think Councilmember Andrews and some others have asked for those plans, and we've sent them out to people that have wanted to look at them. Not that looking at engineering plans is for everyone, but those are complete, and we're satisfied with those. We don't have construction funding. Just so everybody knows, it's around $2 million needed. I think the 2.5 includes things like construction management and contingency for the current cost estimate. And I wanted to let the BPAC know and the members of the community know that recently we saw a window for advancing some of the project when I think the development out at Enclave was building a sidewalk. They hadn't actually seen our plans, and so we sat down with them. We called an emergency meeting before they started pouring concrete, and we said, okay, here's what we have designed. Here's where our right-of-way ends. How does your private development sidewalk tie in with our plans? And we were able to get everybody on the same page there. At the same time, I didn't know this, but I learned it that that development was on the hook for restriping Casa Buena as it is today. So the current center line and where there's fog lanes or shoulders, those were to be striped again. And I said, well, why don't we try to stripe it with bike lanes as envisioned in the plan? And so we went back to the drawing board and we made an attempt to do that. And it turns out that there are enough places where we need to widen the road for the complete streets that it didn't work to do the striping as foreseen in the complete streets project. The same thing happened with sidewalk. I know the sidewalk is probably the bigger priority for the folks that live out there that want to be able to walk into town from that edge of Corte Madera. And so I said, okay, well, let's do this. Forget about the roadway and the widening. Let's break out a separate cost estimate for just the sidewalk. And it turns out that that western side of the road is pretty high cost. It didn't really save us a lot of money to phase that forward. I think of the $2 million, it was in the 1.5 range, so it wasn't like we were going to be able to bang out a sidewalk really quickly. The main reason for that is the drainage and the slopes for those people who spend time out there. It is a complicated construction project given how the grade changes, how we have to meet the ADA requirements for slope and drainage and all that. So we've been doing the best we can. Just want to let everybody know. And so I think the next thing that we'll be doing is going after grant funds for something similar to what we did with Nell and Warnham, some kind of pedestrian enhancement, pedestrian safety, active transportation program grant to advance the project. So that's the update we have for you now, and happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Public Works?
The Enclave is the development that's just above Marin Joe's, is that right? Is that
It's further down. It's actually down closer to the 101 on-ramp.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as part of their development, they had to restripe, that was part of the building?
Part of the agreement, the development agreement, was that they build a sidewalk in their frontage and restripe the roadway. Is this using existing striping?
And for what length? How much of cost?
I believe all the way to the car dealerships.
So
Yeah.
would it be possible, I mean, if that's a set amount, wouldn't it be possible that they just put that money in trust, with the town, so that the town can
Yeah.
have that set aside?
We looked at that item as well. I like the way you're thinking. It turns out that restriping just the existing with thermoplastic or thermostriping was around $20,000 to $30,000, and so we didn't feel that was going to really help us close the $2 million funding gap. So we figured, you know what, those lines are faded, and there is a safety reason for having them be reflective and out there and usable.
Yeah.
So we directed them to go ahead and do as they agreed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. No? Then Sanford Meadow Suite, Casa Buena intersection redesign.
Yeah, Chair Ravazio, right before we move on, I was just going to touch real quickly.
Yes, please, go ahead.
I know you have all seen the Casa Buena Complete Streets project that Peter just spoke about, but just to quickly touch. It goes from Connow to Horse Hill on Casa Buena, and we're looking at doing a Class 3 Sharrows in the northbound direction downhill, and a Class 2 bike lane headed south up the hill. 2 vehicle lanes there, parking and a sidewalk. You can see we're going to be widening toward the freeway to get all of that squeezed in there, and a new sidewalk on the west side. Which will have to conform at some steep driveways, so there will be bulb outs along the way as needed. But yeah, I just wanted to briefly touch on that, just so everybody was refreshed on that project.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then moving right along to the Sanford Meadow Suite congestion relief project.
We're just doing updates on projects. Did you have a question, Patty?
Is there going to be a comment
We could do comment all at the end.
Yeah, we can do comments if you just want to hang on. We're just running through these. Okay, thanks.
We'll make them quick. So yeah, right here is the Sanford Meadow Suite Casa Buena traffic congestion relief, and we have discussed this pretty lengthy at BPAC and at council. So I'll touch on the high points here. We have it completely designed 100% for the plan specs. And we're looking forward to bidding in early 2019 after the new year. So we're anticipating a spring construction for this one, which is it's much needed. And quickly, the aerial, the existing conditions, I think everybody's aware of it. What we're proposing to make new is to eliminate the northbound Sanford movement from Meadow Suite over to Casa Buena for vehicles and allow that a little bike slip for cyclists. We're going to do a little safer crossing for peds at a couple locations across Meadow Suite. It's a shorter cross distance there. And then we're also moving the Casa Buena crosswalk that's in the intersection now eastward over to the bus shelter, where it's going to be pulled out of the busy intersection there with a little bit of a bulb out as well.
And then the only thing I'll add to what Jared's talking about is a couple issues that are near and dear to me because I use this intersection quite regularly, and that would be, you can see what we're planning on some skip striping here for bicyclists. This would be green, and so when you're transferring out of the Class 2, it kind of signals to both bicyclists and drivers that this is a place where cyclists and drivers are in conflict with each other. As cyclists come, they'll have their own bike lane, painted bike lane here. This is converting this. Sanford in the southbound direction is converting from yield to stop. I can't tell you how many times I've come up and down Meadow Suite, either on my bike or driving, and had people treat this yield like it was a green light. So I believe that the safety improvement we're going to get here is important with this new stop control. And then you have the other end of the street as well.
I didn't include that in our
Okay,
slides.
just so real quickly then, same thing at Cano. So if you go down Meadow Suite here, when you get to Cano, it's a yield control, and that will be, I think, important to change to stop control. And where Cano hits Casa Buena, we're going to square up the intersection, improve that crossing and sight lines. So this is a relatively low cost in the grand scheme of things, less than $500,000 to do all these improvements. We'll put new pavement out here. It'll be new striping. It'll be a lot of, in my opinion, true multimodal improvements for bikes, for walkers, for people getting to the bus and driving their cars as well. That's all I have on that, Jared.
Okay. Next update is
Any questions? For
The stop
that
control
project?
on Cano, Peter, is that going to be in both directions or all three directions? It's a T intersection.
Yeah, I think that I'll work with David on this. I think the current design is on Meadow Suite as you approach Cano. We would like for the Meadow Suite traffic to stop. We don't really have high volumes on Cano. Most of the traffic goes up Meadow Suite. And so it would just be a one-way stop at a three-way intersection. Currently, it's a yield, and people don't.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so next update is the steps, lanes, and paths, the fire evacuation program. So this has been discussed over the summer at our August meeting with Mill Valley and their plans and how they went about it. Currently, we've done a little bit of discussions with our NRG coordinator, Lori Rice. She takes care of us in Larkspur. And we've been looking at some GIS coordination. We've spent about 40 hours working with that, and now we've transferred that over to Marin Map to take the lead. And that's basically digitizing our steps, lanes, and paths. And then we're also looking into our categorizing and getting a top 5 to focus on to do some good infrastructure repair and rebuilding. And just a helpful update: our maintenance crews do attend to these and do some clearing, some brush clearing, leaf and debris removal. And I just got confirmation this afternoon that we got the crew up there this week. I think they do it a few times a year, and they just completed the pre-winter version. So that's good news. And then one that I wanted to speak a little bit more about.
Any other questions on steps and paths? Anybody? Yes, go ahead.
We had seen a map that had a whole bunch of steps, lanes, and paths, and then some people came and said there's a lot of those never existed. I'm curious, do we know if there are some steps, lanes, or paths that exist but are just completely overgrown, or I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think we are aware that that there are several out there that that there's still indecision about if there's a maintenance agreement on it, if the town operates that, and that's part of the program is trying to get out there and vet out, what is our responsibility and which ones we are going to be maintaining moving forward. Did you have any?
Yeah. I think our understanding of it isn't so much that they never existed, is that they don't exist now. So I think many people have built over them without coordinating with the town. I don't think we're as interested in going back and trying to recover all of those pathways so much as saying, okay, I would add to fire evacuation, quality of life and walkability and access to town for folks who live on Christmas Tree Hill or Chapman Hill. So there'll be recreational paths, but what we really need to do is figure out, of the ones that are existing, which ones do we need to improve, structurally enhance first, and then wrap those into our evacuation program. So of that one, the map we showed you guys a couple months ago, I would say that about 30% of those are still viable, and we're going to focus on improving those.
Any other questions?
Is there any way that we can get a hold of, it says maintenance crews are going to be working this week on Christmas Tree Hill. Do we know, where they're going to be working and
So, I just heard they went top to bottom. So I think they went through most of the stairs and accessible paths currently and just blowing and clearing off leaves. There's a lot of overgrown, not what we call accessible paths, and we didn't get in there and use weed whips and do excessive debris removal. It was kind of just clearing off the stairs for hazardous conditions at this time.
But feel free to send me an email if you'd got any advice on what might need to be cleared.
Great, I will do that.
Thank you. Okay, next.
All right, so we're pretty excited about the Tamil Vista Complete Streets project. David Parisi had touched on this as kind of dovetailing with that Nellen Warnham gap closure project. So this one it's pretty involved, many different aspects to it. So the kind of an overview here, the three major items that we're looking at, all coordinating amongst each other, are the complete streets, which would be the repaving of the road, the sidewalks, new enhanced ped crossings, and bike lanes each way. And then, so just backing up, the extents of this project go from Pfeiffer to Madera along Tamil Vista. So a halfway point-ish is where that Warnham intersection happens at the Sandra Market Trail. So you kind of see those two broken top and bottom there. We are doing the west side sidewalks. We're correcting the ADA ramps, non-conforming sloping, and that's pretty much a new sidewalk strip on the west side of the roadway there, all the way up. The project extends. And then we're adding bike lanes. This is exciting for us. Both directions, Class 2 lanes, and we're going to be narrowing the travel lanes to help do some traffic calming there. So that's what I'm calling the complete streets portion. It's kind of the superficial work. We're also doing the sanitary sewer system overhaul, and that's currently being started with the reconnaissance there to check out what our district lines look like. The main lines that run underneath the roadway and underneath the sidewalks there. It's very important to us to assess the condition of that prior to putting a lot of money into this infrastructure to make sure that our sewer system is in a good working condition. And if it's not, we need to address it now versus in 5 years after we have a nice new roadway there. So that's item 2. And then the third item is the roundabout at the Madera intersection. So we're really pushing forward to try to incorporate that into the Complete Streets project. So all three of those, they all speak together in multiple ways. So I'll kind of go into a little bit more detail on each one. So the Tamil Vista Complete Streets portion, we have about 90% PS&E, plan specs and estimate on that. So we're excited to be pretty far along on that. Construction estimate is coming in at about 2.7 million for that scope of work. And that includes a nice good pavement deck all the way up the corridor, which is a large cost associated with that. Also, we're in the process of coordinating with other utility providers. That's an important piece of this. And we had comments about notifying homeowners that are at Council Crest about the red curb that's going to be installed there to allow for the Class 2 bike lanes that come in. So we have sent out the notification letters to those 6 homeowners there that are affected. They are basically just lining up with all the other red curbed homes along that corridor that are currently there. We're looking at a summer of 2019 or 2020, depending on how our sewer systems going to be looking and the extent of replacement needed for the sewer work. That's going to affect directly the Tamil Vista Complete Streets portions.
And then Chair Ravazio and members of the committee, I would just add for the construction estimate, we have most of the money for this and through a combination of grant sources. So we've got Transportation Fund for Clean Air from the Air District. We've got money from TAM, from the Transportation Authority of Marin to do it was originally called bike lanes and bike improvements, but we've renamed the project Complete Streets because we want to look at more than just the bike lanes. We also have some developer money from Tam Ridge that is a decent. I think it was $250,000, and then as well as the shortfall can be made with sales tax money. So we will come back to council and ask for somewhere between a quarter and a third of the cost to come from the town, but really to match this variety of grant and private funding sources that we have to move this project forward.
Any questions for Peter? Yeah.
The sidewalk, I live on that street, and I got a red curb letter. I'm wondering if the sidewalks will be widened in any fashion. I think they must be at a very minimum now, and it's kind of almost difficult for 2 people to walk side by side there. It's really...
I think they're going to come in at 4.5 feet for the sidewalk widths, which just touch over the minimum of 4 feet. We don't have a lot of right-of-way there to work with. There is that planting strip, and the plan currently is to keep that little landscape strip in there and to put pavers in place of in several locations. It's vegetated and planted or not right now. But I think that's going to be more homogeneous with pavers at that little vegetated or the little landscape strip there.
And just another comment about red curbs. I often have to go around the corner, essentially use Council Crest if I want to go northbound, because I can't get out of my driveway and go northbound directly. I have to go southbound and go around. And at Council Crest and Tamil Vista, there are often cars parked very close to the intersection, and the sight lines are poor. So if we had red curb on Council Crest, as you've done in Conal, for sightline purposes, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, we can look into that.
I know it's not going to make people happy, but...
I'll be sure to tell them it was your idea.
They know where to find me.
Know where you live. Neighbor.
So just quickly touching on the other 2 aspects here, the sanitary sewer system, go into a little bit more explanation here. Currently, we've televised the sewer lines. We're assessing the condition of them, and this is basically going to dictate how much effect we're going to have at the complete streets level. If we have minor issues or improvements to do to the sanitary sewer system, then potentially we could roll this into the complete streets project all as one. And deliver it all together. If we have major sanitary district mainline repairs to do, that's probably going to be its own project over. And the specific time frame we're working at are summer times for work along Tamil Vista due to the Redwood High School traffic right through there. So we don't want to be doing a lot of major road work outside of the summer, the closed school time. So summer 2019, summer 2020 is kind of where we're looking for those 2. And then the last bit would be the roundabout. So here's just a couple visuals here. We have some concepts initiated, and then we're going to roll it into the complete streets portion. And then obviously there's still dependency on the sanitary system below this intersection as well. So that same kind of summer 2019 or 2020 schedule is what we're looking at for that.
And then the only thing I'll add to that, Jared, is, I mentioned earlier that right-of-way is the key constraint for roundabouts. And so when you go through this intersection today, the next time you go through it, no matter what your mode, just think about how wide the intersection is. So this is an ideal location in town where in the peak hour we do have some queuing. Stop-controlled intersections don't handle a lot of vehicular traffic the way that a roundabout can. And so this, in my opinion, is an ideal location for introducing the town of Corte Madera to the beauty and the functionality of a roundabout. It's kind of a gateway to the town. It could be a gateway to future traffic control device upgrades. But for those that, since we're in BPAC, I'll just go through like some of the maneuvers real quick of how it works. So let's say you're, a young gentleman here with skinny tires like Jared might be. He will use the Class 2 bike lane, look over his left shoulder, and as it's clear, he will take the lane and use the middle of the lane to go in any direction he wants. I doubt he'll make a U-turn, but he could. Most likely he'll go straight and use the lane. If he's with his 6-year-old daughter and he doesn't want to throw her out there, he'll say, Quinn, let's go ahead and get on the sidewalk here, come with Dad, and let's cross over here. And then when we get around the corner, a little slower through the intersection, but then we can go back into the Class 2 here. So that's the way it works for different users in different age groups.
And there'll be ramps to be able to.
Absolutely, yeah, there'll be ramps. So, and then the other thing you do with you see for pedestrians, the crossing distances get a little wider, longer. It takes an extra half a minute or so to get through the intersection as a pedestrian, but that's good for your exercise. It's good for your cholesterol. And what it really does is it puts the pedestrians in a perfect position to be seen by motorists. And so these deflection angles, you can see the angle here. This is called engineering, but it's like engineering in such a way that the cars have to slow down. So I'm not getting folks slowing down through the yields, but you have to slow down through here. You're going to hit a curb edge, and so when we deflect these angles and we cause vehicles to slow down, when we really mark the crosswalks well, we have improved safety records. So that's one of the things I like most about roundabouts is that for all users, in both quantity and severity of collisions, the numbers are much better. We don't have a lot of this. I wouldn't call this a terrible record collision intersection, but we're still going to improve it, I think, if we implement this for functionality and safety.
Yes, go ahead.
I think one thing that it will help will sort of let motor vehicles drivers know that they're in town. They're not driving in freeway mode anymore because they come off the highway, get on Madera, and right now it's a sweeping right turn onto Tamil Vista, and they're still going 35, 40, 45. So this will be very helpful with that, I think. It announces you're in town.
Yeah, and I'm anticipating too that narrowing the traffic lanes will help like it did here.
Yeah.
I'm still amazed at how much traffic has slowed down. Yeah. It's really terrific at the intersection right down there. It's just terrific, and I'm hoping to see the same thing happen on Tamil Vista. Anything else on this? Okay, then I think we had some public comment or questions. If you wanted to ask about these projects.
Jean Greenbaum, Casa Buena Drive. I'm sensing that the project on Casa Buena is less than priority here, and it really is very disturbing to me. My first indication is that there was no presentation as to what the timeline was. My second indication was that you had this Tamil Vista project that's not even completely designed, but has all its funding or all its grants. I don't know what grants have been requested for Casabuena Drive. We've been talking about the street for 20 years. So it's not as if it's a new project. It's not something that's a concern for anybody, apparently, in this town, at least not with any urgency. I think it is extremely urgent. Anybody who lives on that street or takes that street, not only is it connected to a bike lane, and you've got bikes coming down with children. I saw people, boys, the other day were skateboarding down that street. The town has money. It has money for disaster preparedness. I'm just trying to picture what would happen if we had a fire on that street. There's no sidewalks. We'd have to cut through. We'd have to like end up on 101, cutting through the fence because there's no sidewalks. I don't know what people in cars would do on that street in any kind of emergency. So I need to know when it's going to happen. And that's the only project that didn't have any kind of time estimate on it. So I'm here to tell you, I think it's an urgent project. It may not be the center of town. I think there's some, I think the census shows that it's a area that's probably got the highest minority population. I think it's a civil rights issue. And so I would like people to start paying attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wanted to comment? And if there's anybody else, if you can get in line behind Patty, that would be great. Thank you.
Patty Stolier, Costa Buena. I know that Peter had said that when we have that change to not allow cars to go forward anymore towards away from the library, that there would be a trial period to kind of get feedback on that. And I know Peggy had followed up wondering when that's going to happen. So I'm still wondering when that trial period is going to happen. Thanks.
Thank you. And we're going to answer all these. I'm going to turn this back over to Peter when we're done here. Okay. Go ahead.
Cindy Winter, Larkspur. I remember when the Best Western Hotel was under consideration, and David Parisi had some medians on Madera Boulevard. They were sort of abstract shapes, and I thought they looked very nice, and I wondered if maybe they could be reconsidered and brought back. And my second question is, on Tamil Vista, is there going to be at Tamil Vista and Warnham a left turn lane so that I and many other cyclists can make left turns there legally? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Can I turn it over to you, Peter? Can you address these? Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Ravazio. To get to a few of, we'll start with Jean's comments. I think that what Todd has asked, what the town manager has asked, is that we come to council and kind of discuss our major transportation projects in whole. And I think that'll probably happen in January, February. Casa Buena will be one of those. That is a major transportation improvement project for the town. It is going to be discussed in the context of Paradise Drive and the planned improvements out there, as well as Tamil Vista. And at that time, I think we can present a more comprehensive look at the funding sources, the amounts we have, when they have to be used by. I've only been here a year. Most of the grants that have come in on Tamil Vista certainly came in before I started, so I can't really speak to when and how those were secured. But I do believe that, we're hearing enough from the council and from the community that seeking grants for Casa Buena is something that is important, and it's something we will do. And then we'll just pose the question to the community and to the council, given what the volumes are, given what the collision histories are, given what the funding sources are, how would you, council, like to spend the money? And that question, I think, is, we'll have that discussion in 2019. And so we hear the urgency, and that's why I kind of wanted to spend a little time in talking about the efforts we went to try to parse out the sidewalk project and parse out the striping project and move those forward. Unfortunately, we weren't successful. The trial period for Sanford closure, I think the best time to do that would be in February. So I'll plan on setting that up and putting a little notification out. The nice thing about that is we just want to see how people behave. We'll put detour signs, send folks around, and really observe it during the peak hour. We did the modeling. We looked at how the volumes are at Casa Buena in Sanford. The volumes are pretty high there, and the amount of traffic that needs to deflect from Sanford to go around to Casa Buena is a few cars a minute. It's not a lot. And so from a modeling standpoint, we're pretty comfortable that it would work. There will be some adjustment. There'll be some confusion. Some people will go up and use Lakeside. But yeah, I do think the trial period would be interesting to observe and get feedback for. I've heard Mr. Parisi, in terms of Cindy Winter's comment, call it a peanut about. So an oval, an oblong roundabout that does help things around the Corte Madera Inn and how the town center exits. I don't think that concept is completely gone. I think it's a little expensive. I would like to start with the roundabout and then deal with what happens further down Madera, perhaps at a later phase. So that's still on the table. And then I'm a little confused about the Tamil Vista Warnham left turn lane for cyclists. I know that we talked about onto Sandra Marker Trail. When you're going north on Tamil Vista, we are designing a way for cyclists to make a left pretty easily and legally to get onto the Sandra Marker Trail. But from Warnham, if you're going southbound on Tamil Vista, getting onto Warnham, you can use the left turn lane like a vehicle, or you can act like a ped. So I don't know that we have a great solution for that. But we can look and see if we can figure something out. So I think I've addressed all the questions I took notes on.
Great. Thank you. If I can just add to that too, so we started working on Tamil Vista a couple of years ago because of the hotel project. And unfortunately, these projects take years. I mean, and the reason Tamil Vista looks like it's further ahead is because it started earlier in detail, and there were also grants that were applied for as part of it, and those are starting to come in. And we're starting to now do the same thing on Casa Buena. It just started a little later. So it's not that it's not a priority. It is a priority. It's just that these things take time. And, you know, I think Peter's moving as quickly as we can. I think by breaking out those projects and trying to make it move faster, you can see it's a priority, and we're trying to get done what we can. Okay, moving on to approving the minutes of the August 16th.
Comments from
On
any of the project updates?
yeah, we can do that.
Okay, so comments I have is that when this comes back before the BPAC on steps, lanes, and paths, I'd like to see if we can have some outreach and see if we can start to form a volunteer committee that can assist the BPAC and push the idea that as the project goes forward, that it's going to be integral, that volunteers will likely be integral to making it happen. So I'd like to make sure that that's discussed when it comes back before the BPAC. And then my only other comment was with respect to the Tamil Vista Complete Streets project, two developments are going to be really, what's my point? They're going to be dependent upon the complete streets, and that's going to be the theater project when that gets developed, and of course the Best Western project when that finally goes through whatever development. And I don't know to what extent planning and the council can extract development fees that help pay for the Tamil Vista Complete Streets, but it just seems to me that they're going to be such beneficiaries of the work that's being designed and engineered and may actually be fully constructed by the time the theater goes through its development. But I'd like to see those developers pay their fair share for what may also be completed by that point. And I don't know if that's legal, but I just want to plant that seed. Those are my only comments.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, then we will move on to approval of the minutes of the August 16th meeting. Were there any changes or corrections to the minutes?
Nope.
Yeah.
It's item 7, the U.S. bicycle route designation through Corte Madera. The minutes, and overall, they're usually very complete, but in this case, there's references to option 1 and option 2, and those are not described in any fashion. So it's, if you're not familiar with the, if you weren't there, or you wouldn't know what we're talking about. So I think option 1, as I recall, was a route over Horse Hill via Corte Madera Avenue and Camino Alto, and option 2 was along the Horse Hill path, and I think that just should be included in the minutes.
Okay. Would you like to move that we approve it with that amendment?
Yes. I move
Okay.
that we approved it with that amendment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so the minutes are approved as amended by Cheryl. It looks like our next meeting is set for February 21st, 2 months.
May I make one small suggestion for an agenda item for the 21st?
Sure.
We had previously, when Nisha Patel was still with the town, looked at the possible placement of the signage that says motorists are required to give 3 feet. And I know that Nisha marked up a map. I'd like to see that come back before the BPAC so that we can review that map, if it can be located, and then determine if there's funding, if there's a consensus about where the signage should be placed, and, get that in the works.
Okay. We'll take a look, see if we can get that on the next agenda. Okay.
I'm not sure if we agreed on those signs being placed. So the way you stated it, it sounds like there was an agreement on those signs being placed. And so I don't know if we're discussing this now or.
We're not discussing it now.
We'll just have it come back on the agenda on the 21st.
I think we're just saying is he wants to discuss it on the next agenda. We're not allowed to discuss things that aren't on the agenda.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, if there are no further comments, then we are adjourned. Thank you very much for coming this evening. Really appreciate it. Staff, thank you. Jared, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all
Thanks for
BPAC
pizza.
members.
No problem.